our broadcast tonight, President Park Geun-hye apologizes to the nation for the government's poor initial response to the Sewol-ho ferry accident. She says a ministry will be set up to efficiently manage any natural or man-made disasters. Rescue divers have recovered over a dozen more bodies from the sunken Sewol-ho ferry on day 14 of their search efforts. An official memorial altar for all the victims of the disaster opens in the city of Ansan. Plus, North Korea conducts live fire drills into waters near the western inter-Korean maritime border. President Park orders the military to strike if any shells land in South Korean territory. These stories and more next on Arirang News at 8. Thank you for joining us. It's Tuesday, April 29th here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yu-sun. President Park Geun-hye has apologized to the nation for the Sewol-ho ferry accident, more specifically the government's poor initial response to the tragedy. She also vowed to root out social irregularities that are thought to have contributed to the deadly accident. Our Park Ji-won has more.
President Park Geun-hye apologized on Tuesday to the public for the ferry disaster that continues to grip the nation. During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the president apologized to the people for the government's inability to prevent the accident in the first place and its handling of the situation early on.
이런 사고로 많은 고귀한 생명을 잃게 되어 국민 여러분께 죄송스럽고 마음이 무겁습니다.
She said efforts to find the dozens of victims who remain unaccounted for is the most important task right now. To make sure such an incident doesn't take place again, President Park said she would create a national safety ministry under the Prime Minister's office. Once established, it would systematically and efficiently manage responses to both natural and man-made disasters.
국가 차원의 대형 사고에 대해서는 지휘 체계에 혼선이 발생하지 않도록 총리실에서 직접 관장하면서 부처 간 업무를 총괄, 조정하고 지휘하는 가칭 국가안전처를 신설하려고 합니다.
Earlier in the day, President Park Geun-hye visited the Ansan Hwarang Memorial Hall, where an altar has been set up for the victims of the ferry accident. She paid her respects to those who lost their lives and spoke to some of their families. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
There's been an outpouring of grief and sadness in Korea over the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy that's left more than 300 people dead or missing. To pay respects to the victims and their families, a large-scale memorial altar opened Tuesday in the city of Ansan to replace a temporary one that was installed last week. Our Kim Young-gil was there.
Dressed in black, people line up to remember the victims of the Sewol-ho tragedy, bowing in front of portraits and weeping. This new memorial hall opened on Tuesday at a park in Ansan City. The venue is 6 times larger than a previous altar in the city. It will stay open 24 hours a day for anyone to pay respects to the Sewol-ho ferry victims who so tragically lost their lives.
When I saw the portraits of the so many victims, my eyes blurred and I couldn't fight back the tears. I imagined what it would be like if my child was on the ferry. The country needs to take full responsibility for the tragedy.
Many high school students were seen paying tribute at the mass memorial. Nearly 90% of the victims were students from Tanon High School in Ansan City.
The victims were high school students like me, and it breaks my heart to think how frightened and cold they must have been inside the ferry at the time of the accident. They had a whole life ahead of them, and I can't help but think that it could have been me.
The mass memorial hall is run by the government and jointly sponsored by Ansan City and the Gyeonggi-do province. Thousands of people are expected to come to the Ansan Hwarang Memorial Altar to pay respects to the victims. A total of 17 memorial altars have been set up across the nation. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The National Assembly convened a plenary session this Tuesday to address the Sewol-ho ferry accident. Lawmakers passed a resolution that calls for supporting those affected by the tragedy and helping with the investigation to determine its cause. Out of the 253 lawmakers that attended, all but 3 voted in favor of the resolution. They also agreed to donate 10% of their salary from the month of May to victims of the accident and their families. Lawmakers agreed that the primary focus now should be on finding those who remained unaccounted for. They also stressed the importance of punishing those responsible for the tragedy to the fullest extent of the law. The lawmakers also decided to forge ahead with the establishment of a memorial park and monument in Ansan, the city where most of the victims were from. It's been 2 weeks since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry sunk off Korea's southwestern coast of Chindo Island, and the death toll has risen to 205, while 97 are still missing and presumed dead. We now connect to our Connie Kim at the News Center for the latest. Connie, the weather has given rescue divers trouble in recent days, but they seem to have made some progress today.
Well, the weather conditions in Chindo seem to have improved as the clouds have cleared out and the waves are calmer than yesterday. However, it's a different story altogether under the surface of the water. The currents are stronger with speeds of up to 2.4 meters per second. And to help divers in the hostile environment, authorities had said they will attempt to deploy a diving bell at around 8 p.m. and if planned, it should be underway as we speak. It was planned to be deployed earlier this afternoon, but strong currents have delayed this process. A diving bell is a chamber that can be used as a base for divers, enabling them to stay underwater for about an hour without having to return to the surface. Now, 16 more bodies were recovered today, pushing the death toll to 205, with 97 still unaccounted for. 13 of them were found in the lobby of the 5th floor, with the rest retrieved from the left side of the cabins on the 4th floor. The bodies are yet to be identified, but most are presumed to be Tanon High School students. So far, more than half of the 64 cabins where the missing passengers are presumed to have now been searched. Now, the first phase of the rescue operations are expected to come to a close at the middle of next month.
Connie, what about the ongoing criminal investigation? Authorities appear to be casting a wider net.
That's right, Yusan. A lot of attention is being put on the Sewol-ho crew members who abandoned ship. The cases of the 4 ferry mates who have been arrested, including the vessel's first mate, known by his last name Kang, will be sent to prosecution. Kang reportedly called his employer Cheonghae Marine Company when the vessel was listing time he should have spent trying to save the ill-fated ferry and its passengers. Kang was also the one responsible for managing the amount of ballast water on the vessel, which is believed to be one of the factors that caused the ferry to capsize. Criticism against the crew who managed to evacuate is likely to expand as phone logs show that the crew, including Captain Lee Jun-seok, called Cheonghae Marine Company 7 times prior to their escape from 9:01 to 9:37, just before the last communication was made with the control tower in Chindo Island at 9:39 a.m. And also this morning, the president of the Cheonghae Marine Company, Kim Han-sik, was summoned for the first time. He's being looked at for any links between Yu Byung-an, the practical owner of the ferry operator. Investigations are being conducted to determine whether Kim was involved in any business irregularities, such as embezzlement and tax evasion, in connection with Yu. Now, an arrest warrant has been issued for 2 members of the Korea Shipping Association who have been under speculation of destroying evidence in relation to the case. They are suspected of deleting data on their computers or switching PCs. Arrest warrants were earlier requested against 3 members of the association, but one of them has been dismissed. Well, that's all from me for now, but I'll be back in about 2 hours with more updates.
North Korea has ratcheted up tensions on the Korean peninsula this Tuesday afternoon with a round of live fire drills near the de facto inter-Korean maritime border. Our Hwang Sung-hee has more.
North Korea conducted live fire drills near its disputed western sea border with the South on Tuesday. The exercises, however, were short-lived, lasting just 10 minutes. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the North conducted artillery drills in 2 regions north of the northern limit line in the West Sea, and that none of the 50 artillery shells fired fell in South Korean waters. South Korean residents on 5 nearby border islands were advised to take shelter. Last month, during a similar drill by the North, the two Koreas exchanged fire across the maritime border after more than 100 North Korean artillery shells fell into South Korean territory. Expecting such a scenario could occur this time around, President Park Geun-hye had told the South Korean military to respond firmly should any North Korean shells land in South Korean territory. Seoul's defense ministry beefed up its vigilance by dispatching warships and fighter jets to the area. The fire drills come amid Pyongyang's threats of something big and unimaginable for its enemies before April 30th. This on top of a threat it issued last month to conduct a new type of a nuclear test. Experts say a fourth nuclear test could be in the works, as recent satellite imagery has shown increased activity at the regime's nuclear test site. During a visit to Seoul last week, U.S. President Barack Obama warned that another test would only further isolate the North and said that South Korea and the United States stand shoulder to shoulder against any provocation by the North. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now shifting our focus to the economy, Korea posted a current account surplus for the 25th straight month in March on the back of firm auto and computer chip exports. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
March was another bullish month for Korea in terms of its current account surplus. The nation's central bank said Tuesday that the surplus stood at over $7.3 billion last month, up nearly $3 billion from February. Exports of goods rose almost 6% from a year earlier to around $54 billion, helped by strong shipments in automobiles, semiconductors, and telecommunication products. Imports went up slightly more than 3% to $46 billion. The gain in exports, however, came largely from growing demand in advanced economies, with shipments to emerging markets remaining subdued.
Korea's exports aren't dependent on just one or two countries, so the recovery seen in advanced nations like the US and the European Union should spread to emerging economies in order for exports to stay strong.
The nation's current account surplus has been working as a buffer for any potential capital outflow from Korea that might be triggered by the U.S. Federal Reserve's scale back of stimulus measures. The cumulative surplus for the first 3 months stood at over $15 billion. The central bank says the country is on track to meet its surplus projection of $68 billion for all of this year, given that the surplus tends to expand towards the end of the year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The world's largest smartphone maker, Samsung Electronics, posted its second straight drop in quarterly profits on Tuesday. But the company says a pickup in sales of its high-end televisions and smartphones are likely to help the tech giant rebound in the second quarter. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Samsung Electronics reported its second straight annual fall in quarterly profits. While it raked in roughly $8.2 billion in the first 3 months of this year, it marked a 3.3% drop on year. Sales numbers also dropped to about $52 billion, a near 10% drop from the same period last year. But the Korean smartphone maker's first quarter profits were higher than its provisional estimates, with an unexpected turnaround in Samsung's IT and mobile business division, which makes up the lion's share of the company's overall profit. It made a slight recovery, posting operating profits of around $6.2 billion, a turnaround from last year's fourth quarter earnings, which came in at $5.3 billion. Samsung's recovery is due in part to increased sales performance of its premium Galaxy devices, including the Galaxy S4 and the Note 3. The company shipped out 113 million mobile phones and tablet computers in the first quarter. Its components parts division, which handles semiconductors, also played a role in boosting earnings. But the company's display division, which dominates the OLED panel market, posted an operating loss of $78 million. The forecast for Samsung's second quarter is mixed, but the company says it expects better earnings as it plans to roll out new mobile devices in the coming months and push its new wider lineup of curved ultra-high-definition TVs ahead of the World Cup in Brazil in June.
However, Lee Min-hee, an analyst from IM Investment and Securities based in Korea, says a boost in the IT and mobile business division is unlikely, as the second quarter has traditionally been an off-season in demand for IT products. Korea-based LG Electronics, one of the world's largest television makers, also posted its first quarter earnings Tuesday at $489 million, marking a 44% on-year jump. The company attributes its increased demand on global sporting events, like this year's Winter Olympics, which spurred to consumers to purchase TVs with sharper displays. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And for the first time in 4 years, Samsung Electronics' share of the global smartphone market has dropped. U.S. market research firm Strategy Analytics says that the Korean tech giant's share in the market in the first quarter came to 31.2%, down more than 1 percentage point on year. It represents the first decline since the fourth quarter of 2009. However, Samsung wasn't alone. Apple's slice of the pie plunged to 15.3%, down 2.2 percentage points. The research firm attributed the slumping numbers to increased competition in the market from second-tier smartphone makers like Huawei and Lenovo. And it's time to check on stories making headlines on the global front, from Western powers imposing new sanctions against Russia to a deadly attack in the heart of Syria. We go live to our Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, let's start with the crisis in Ukraine. The United States and the European Union have slapped fresh sanctions against Russia. Can you tell us the scope of these new sanctions?
Yusun, this new package of sanctions targets dozens of key individuals in Russia, but whether they will have a big impact on the situation in Ukraine remains to be seen. The White House said it expanded asset freezes and visa bans to 7 Russian government officials, as well as 17 companies linked to President Putin's inner circle. The European Union also banned 15 more Russian officials from entering its 28-nation bloc, as well as freezing their assets.
These are people who are responsible for actions against territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty of Ukraine. The Council has just formally adopted this addition, so now on this list of people targeted with assets freeze and travel ban, we have in total 48 names.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called this latest round of sanctions meaningless, shameful, and disgusting. He said Moscow would take retaliatory measures which would, quote, be painfully felt in Washington.
And shifting our focus now to the Asia-Pacific, U.S. President Barack Obama wrapped up his whirlwind tour of Japan, Korea, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Paul, tell us what's come out of this landmark trip.
Well, the main agenda for President Obama was to boost bilateral ties and advance U.S. trade interests. But the one place noticeably left off his itinerary was China. The president wanted to reaffirm America's commitment to defend its Asian allies and counter China's rise in the region. Our Connie Lee has more.
It's a wrap for U.S. President Barack Obama. His time in the Philippines on Monday marked the last leg of his week-long Asia tour. And here, the U.S. reached a 10-year defense deal to allow more U.S. troops in the Philippines. The signing of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement and President Obama's entire Asia trip was seen as an effort by the U.S. to counter Chinese aggression in the region. However, at a press conference in Manila, President Obama said the U.S. wasn't trying to counter China, but only wants to make sure that territorial disputes are handled peacefully.
We don't even take a specific position on the disputes between nations. But as a matter of international law and international norms, we don't think that coercion and intimidation is the way to manage these disputes.
The Philippines, as well as Japan and South Korea, have ongoing territorial disputes with China. President Obama, who visited Japan, South Korea, and Malaysia this past week, did not swing by China. At each stop along the way, the U.S. president reaffirmed America's commitments to defend its Asian allies in the face of China's rising power. For South Korea, this means diplomatic commitments from the U.S. against the threat from North Korea. During his tour, the president also tried to press Japan and Malaysia on joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, but will go home to Washington without any firm commitments. The 12-nation trade deal that extends from Asia to Latin America does not include China. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And moving now to the Middle East, we reported yesterday that an Egyptian court sentenced hundreds of supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood to death. Paul, how has the international community responded?
This latest ruling has drawn widespread criticism from the United Nations, the United States, and the European Union. They've slammed it as a major violation of human rights and a grave injustice to those accused. The Egyptian court recommended the death sentence for 683 alleged members of the Muslim Brotherhood, including its leader, Mohammed Badieh. International rights groups are also criticizing the mass trial, which only lasted a few minutes, preventing defense lawyers from presenting their case.
Or, the government would have to prove them, as we say in the United States in criminal cases, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So you have to show evidence. And it sounds to me like if you can convict one person, 500 people or more of injuring or killing one policeman, it's ridiculous.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said he was alarmed by the news and that the verdicts clearly did not meet the basic standards for a fair trial. The UN chief added that the move undermines the long-term stability of the region. One human rights advocate called it the largest possible death sentences in recent history.
And Paul, before we let you go, there's been a deadly attack reported in Syria in just the last couple of hours. What can you tell us about this latest act of violence?
Well, Yusun, details are still coming in, but right now at least 12 people have reportedly been killed and more than 50 others injured in a mortar attack in central Damascus. According to Syrian state media, 4 mortar shells struck the mainly Shia neighborhood near a technical institute. Police have blamed terrorists for the attack, but no singular group has yet claimed responsibility. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has also confirmed the incident and expects the number of fatalities to rise. The attack comes a day after President Bashar al-Assad said he would run for re-election as Syria's civil war continues to extend into its 3rd year. Yusun?
All right, Paul, thank you for that update, and we'll see you back here shortly. Let's now go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for a checkup on the conditions on Chindo and elsewhere in the country. Bo-kyung?
Yusun, it has been 2 weeks since the accident happened, and families are now waiting for the safe return of their loved ones. Weather on Chindo remains fairly calm, but things under the sea aren't working in our favor. Today through Friday is when we'll get to see spring tides, and this is when the speed of tidal currents reach their fastest. At the moment, tidal currents are moving at around 2.4 meters per second, and this would be about 67 meters per second on land. Now, shifting our focus to other parts of the country, the nation is under the influence of a low-pressure trough from the waters south of the peninsula, which is why we're seeing cloudy or rainy skies across. Heavy rainfall advisories have been issued on the eastern coastal regions. Approximately 20 millimeters per hour of heavy precipitation is falling there, and that may be accompanied by storm. Otherwise, things will clear up by later tonight, but those of you on the eastern coastal regions may want to keep an umbrella handy through Wednesday. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul and Gwangju hit the low 20s, while Daegu and Busan make it to the high teens. Moving on to other regions, Jeju peaks at 18 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 16 and 10. Well, that's all the updates I have for you now, and back to you, Yusun.
Thanks, Bo-kyung, and that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Choi Yusun in Seoul, and join us again for more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time.